Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be continuing a project where we change Magnolia Promenade from the Get to Work expansion pack into the seaside town from Bob's Burgers, and specifically Jimmy Pesto's Pizzeria. However, before we get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about the architectural elements that the creators of the show are pulling in to create the unnamed town for Bob's Burgers. Because Bob's Burgers is an unnamed seaside town, it can pull in a lot of different architectural elements from different Victorian neighborhoods across America. And this is actually a really smart idea because it creates a sort of Pan-American feeling. And that's sort of what the creators are going for. They don't want it to be specifically a New Jersey seaside town or a San Francisco seaside town. And they're clearly pulling in a lot of different elements, such as the color palette from the Painted Ladies in San Francisco, while having a lot of the shape language for the town being very influenced from Jersey and Cape May. It sort of creates a very specific kind of nostalgia. This nostalgia for a time in our history when things were booming, but it's not necessarily doing great now, and we see that with all of the characters in the show. They are all struggling financially, except for Mr. Fishoder. And to get to the rich parts of town, you actually have to take a ferry across the bay. This is Linda and Bob and the kids at some open houses just so Linda can go and eat free shrimp. It's easy to get caught up in the nostalgia because it's so easy to think, oh, it was such a great time back then. But I'm not sure that moment in time when everything was perfect ever really existed at all. Even at the height of the 1920s, there was a lot of outrage, there was a lot of upheaval. No moment in history has lacked those things. If you compare infant mortality rate from then to now, if you compare the life expectancy from then to now, there are so many different measures that tell us life has gotten significantly better. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but you know what? There was never a moment in time when it was. We've always all just been doing our best, kind of like how the Belchers are, and it still manages to be doing all of that amidst this backdrop of nostalgia and history and our shared past, and it doesn't dismiss it. It makes it a part of the underlying fabric of the show. It makes it a part of the life of the show. And I love that because I love architecture and I love history. So yeah, let's get to the speed build. Unfortunately for this speed build, I did not actually record the building of the shell for this build. I went to make the video and found I had a screen capture of a blank lot, which is super useful. Anyway, you didn't miss terribly too much. I was mostly trying to figure out where the different buildings could be on the lot. I had to fit in the stationery store and the bank next to Jimmy Pesto's. I originally had a building behind Jimmy Pesto's as well because I was thinking that there would be room, but I ended up getting rid of that. So you didn't miss much. It was mostly me going back and forth on the layout a little bit. So where I ended up was with Jimmy Pesto's and the coloring on that all figured out already, as well as the window placement. So that is what's going on there. Now, a complicated thing for making Jimmy Pesto's is it is 3 stories tall, but you only ever see the ground floor and specifically the dining room area. So where is everything else happening? We do know that the Pesto family lives above the restaurant, similarly to how the Belchers live above their restaurant. But is their apartment 2 floors? Is it 1 floor and there's another apartment that somebody else owns? There's a lot of unknowns. So I didn't want to have another apartment in the same building, mostly because I didn't want to have to deal with that. Also, you can't really play roommates if you're going to be playing this as a restaurant. You can have your family living above the restaurant while you play the restaurant. You will still need to have a home lot in addition to your restaurant lot, but you can bring them to the restaurant lot and have them live there as though it's their normal home. You just have to remember to pay your bills on your phone. Otherwise, the electricity will be shut off, which is quite annoying. And yes, that did happen to me. Well, it happened to the Belchers. While I was playing them, I was playtesting the Belchers lot, and they did not remember to pay their bills. That's what happens when you play on a restaurant lot. Something to be aware of. In trying to figure out what I was going to do with all of this space, I decided to put their apartment on the top floor and to make the middle floor a event space. So it could just be additional seating if the restaurant was really busy, or it could be used as an event space to be rented out for events such as weddings or quinceañeras or birthday parties or retirement parties, whatever. So later on in the video, you'll see I make it into an event space and I set it up so that it looks like it's ready for a wedding. And I do actually have some people get married there. I'll show that too. The belters that I downloaded from the gallery are amazing and wonderful, but they were not married. Like, they're related to the children in the way that they should be. They're both the parents of the children, but having had 3 children together, they had no relationship with one another whatsoever. They were just like acquaintances. Who is this person? I don't know. I've had 3 children with them and I have no idea who they are. So I quickly had them romance each other, and then I was like, I need to test Jimmy Pesto's restaurant, so I'll take them over there and I'll test it. And since I'm here anyway, I might as well take them upstairs and have them get married, so I did that as well. And in keeping with the weird nerdy tradition of the show and just the level of information I know about this show, I did make Bob get lobster thermidor for his meal at the restaurant, because on their first date he apparently had lobster and had like a massive allergic reaction. Of course, in The Sims he can't have a massive allergic reaction. I just had him have lobster. That's what he had on their first date, which is hilarious. Like, why did he not already know that about himself? Like, he lives in a seaside town. He grew up in a seaside town. How did he not know he was allergic to lobster? Oh, it's fine. I mean, I guess his dad was also a burger man, so maybe, like, his dad was allergic to lobster. Oh my gosh, he's Gene. He's like Gene, because Gene was like, I've never had lobster. And then eventually they, like, rebel and have lobster, and Gene has a massive allergic reaction. Yeah. Okay, so Gene is just like the continuation of Bob. It all makes sense. All of the things are coming together. Anyway, on to Jimmy's. I'm just rambling about Bob. Jimmy Pesto. What are things I know about Jimmy Pesto? So, I mean, obviously his name is actually Jimmy Pavlovich. I can't really say that name very well. How we could describe his restaurant is, well, it's popular, but it's also mediocre. And it has a lot of stuff on the wall. I would say it's like mildly kitschy, tacky. Also, he has like a gift shop. Like, who is it? Although, you know what? When I think about it, sports bars. You know what it's like? It's like a sports bar masquerading as a fancy Italian restaurant. And then he has all of this like Italian kitschiness everywhere. Italian restaurants don't necessarily have to be fancy. It's just they tend to have that, I don't know, they have that vibe to them. They're like, oh, they're fancy. And I'm going to be real, I have definitely been to a bunch of Italian restaurants that remind me a lot of Jimmy Pesto's restaurant. Like, I feel like it is such a staple American experience to have gone to a restaurant like Jimmy Pesto's. Growing up, I remember we would drive into town I lived in the mountains. I grew up in the mountains, and driving into town was like a big thing. Like, it was like at least a 40-minute drive to get into town. And so it seemed like it was really fancy to like drive into town and like have a fancy Italian meal. But the reality is like, I don't know, my family was a working class family, didn't have a lot of money, and it was a restaurant that they could afford to bring their kids to have a nice meal, but it was still affordable. It was a family restaurant. And when I've gone to those similar sort of places as I've gotten older, I can sort of see it more clearly for what it is, and it's not really fancy. But it just cracks me up because in the episode Weekend at Mort's, Louise suggests to Mort that he takes his date to Jimmy Pesto's, and Bob is offended because she calls it a fancy restaurant, and she's like, well, I only know 2 restaurants, and they have cloth napkins. And honestly, that's how I remember thinking about it as a kid, is like, yeah, restaurants with cloth napkins were fancy. I mean, I actually thought that restaurants that had onion rings were fancy too, just because I really liked onion rings and it wasn't something you could like have everywhere. But like, if we went to like a fancy restaurant, they would usually, what I thought was a fancy restaurant, a restaurant with cloth napkins, they would have onion rings, and I loved them so much, and I was not even allowed to get them most of the time because they were not healthy choices. But occasionally, I was indulged and allowed to get onion rings, and it was like my favorite thing ever. I loved onion rings. Now I'm like, about onion rings. It's like the weird thing about growing up. It's a weird thing. So yeah, the fancy restaurant. It's like the fancy restaurant from a kid's perspective, you know? And as you get older and experience more stuff, you're like, it's not really fancy. It's like a family restaurant. It's like normal. Like, it's a nice restaurant, but it's not really fancy. I feel like in Sims sometimes, like especially when you go to like other builds, like the one that they come pre-installed for Dine Out, like the one that you can place when you get the pack, like that one is so, like the way they designed it, they're like making it this really modern, fancy restaurant, which is cool, but at the same time, like I kind of like playing The Sims more normal, with just normal run-of-the-mill people. Here we are finishing up the event space, and we have Linda and Bob's amazing and beautiful wedding ceremony. So I know that they would be horrified to be married in Jimmy Pesto's, but you know what? It's fine. It's fine. We're just going to pretend this happened at another different Italian restaurant. I love Bob's face here. He's just like, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? But he loves her and she loves him, and they're so cute. So here's the back of the restaurant. I did put a dumpster back there, if you can see, next to the telephone pole. It is from SIms4. Lifesaver. I love the dumpster. It's great. This is the apartment that I made. A couple of things about the apartment. I didn't really know what the deal was with Jimmy Pesto's wife, and I'm here to spill the tea for you. I looked it up online, and people were saying she died, which I was like, oh my God, that's so sad. And that like his whole like hatred of Bob was because his wife died and he misses her, and he like is seeing Linda and Bob every day across the street, and it's like breaking his heart, and he just hates Bob for like having all the things that he doesn't have anymore, which is like really dramatic and like heartbreaking, and also like it's like something from a romance novel, and it's totally not at all true, because in season 2 episode 1, the Belchies, after they escape the taffy factory that was being demolished, Andy and Ollie see their dad, who's come to watch the factory be demolished, and they run up to him and they're like, oh my God, you came for us, and like hug him. And they, like, I love Andy and Ollie. Like, they're like the cutest. I can't get over them and how cute they are and their ridiculousness. And he says, I thought you were with your mother, which totally blows the whole like she's dead out of the water. Also, it kind of suggests maybe they're estranged, maybe they don't get on so well. And this is then later confirmed in season 7, episode 8, when Tina goes to school as a robot. She sprains her ankle and then goes to school as a robot. And she ends up with Jimmy Jr. in a utility closet, and he is singing musical poems, not songs, musical poems. And one of them is My Mom's New Friend Alan, He's Okay, which confirms, I mean, again, Mom is alive and estranged from or divorced from Jimmy Sr. So there we have it. He is not a single father. He is just a divorced father. And the kids are with him part of the time and they're with her part of the time. Though it seems like they're more with him than they are with her. This is Andy and Ollie's room. I did it pretty simple, as well as Jimmy Jr.'s room. Since we don't ever see them, I wasn't super into making the rooms really detailed. Also, the downstairs is so detailed that I was kind of like, economy of items. So if you want to play it with an apartment above it, that's totally cool. Otherwise, if you're going to play it as a restaurant, I would highly recommend deleting the door. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. This is my favorite part of everything. And here is my favorite part of Andy and Ollie being ridiculous. If you have enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a fabulous, wonderful, amazing day.